World War III is no longer a distant possibility. It's already happening in front of our eyes, yet the signs are being ignored. Geopolitical tensions are rising, global conflicts are escalating, and the world is inching closer to a catastrophic war that could involve all the major powers. And here's the truth. This conflict is already in motion. In 2018, the US and China began a trade war, when the US imposed tariffs on Chinese imports to address trade imbalances and intellectual property theft. This conflict quickly escalated. What began as a trade dispute soon became about global dominance. The South China Sea, once a hub for trade, became a flashpoint. The stakes were no longer just economic, they were military. By 2022, Russia's invasion of Ukraine shifted the geopolitical landscape. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, violating international law, and the Budapest Memorandum, which guaranteed Ukraine's territorial integrity. The 2022 invasion of Ukraine marked a dramatic escalation, with Russia's military moving into Ukrainian cities. It was no longer just about borders, it was about principles. The stakes became global. In Kyiv, the air smells of burning rubble and destruction. What was once a vibrant city now feels like a ghost town. The streets are quieter as people live in constant fear, not only for themselves but for a city on the brink. In Moscow, the streets are calm, but behind the scenes, the tension is palpable. The decisions made there continue to echo through Ukraine and the South China Sea. But this isn't just about Ukraine or the South China Sea. These are only the opening moves. The real question is, how far will this go before the world is forced into a global conflict? And it's not just the surface-level skirmishes that matter. The battlefield is shifting. The next stage of this global conflict isn't just fought on the ground, it's moving into the digital realm, and it's already happening. In Syria, Amal, a mother of 3, never imagined living through a war. One moment, she was at the market with her children, and the next, her world was shattered. "We thought it would stay far away," she says, her voice trembling. "You don't hear the bombs at first. You feel them in your chest, then the silence afterward. But you know everything is gone." The city she once knew, filled with children's laughter, is now eerily quiet, the smell of burning rubble mixing with dust in the air. Amal no longer dreams of normalcy for her children. She counts the days, waiting for the next attack. In Kyiv, Igor, a father of 2, stands in the ruins of his home. "My son still asks when we can go back to the park," he says, his voice cracking. "I don't know what to tell him anymore." The streets are silent. The life that once filled them, now replaced by the constant hum of air raid sirens. The air is thick with smoke and the stink of fear, the atmosphere pressing down on every person still trying to live through this nightmare. Meanwhile, in Moscow, life carries on as usual. The streets are calm, and the political leaders making these decisions are insulated from the devastation. In the meeting rooms of the Kremlin, the weight of their choices feels far removed from the suffering of those in Ukraine. The distance between the leaders in Moscow and the people living through these horrors is staggering. Behind closed doors, decisions are made that will shape the future. But it's the Amals and Igors of the world who are left to bear the burden. These stories, of families torn apart, cities destroyed, and lives ruined, are the ones that matter. The weight of the past rests most heavily on those least equipped to carry it. When Nazi officers evaded justice, it wasn't just the world's political systems that paid the price. The real cost was borne by the people. The survivors, the families, the communities torn apart by violence and fear. For them, the war didn't end when the guns fell silent. It lived on in their hearts, in their homes, in every quiet moment spent wondering if those responsible would ever face consequences. Imagine a mother in Eastern Europe, standing among the ruins of her home, the smell of burnt wood still lingering in the air. She clutches a photograph, her husband's face frozen in time. His death wasn't just physical, it was an emotional violence, a gaping hole that nothing could fill. Yet years later, she learns that those responsible for the destruction have lived freely, untouched by justice. In post-war councils, the air was thick with tension. Diplomats and generals whispered about the fate of those who committed atrocities, but it was the silence, heavy, unsettling, that stood out. The weight of human suffering lingered in those rooms, unspoken yet ever-present. The real toll came not in the official meetings, but in quiet moments, like when a survivor of Auschwitz finds out that the officer responsible for his suffering is living without consequence. Rage and disbelief flood his heart, knowing justice has been bypassed again. The humiliation of knowing that while the world moved on, the perpetrators continued their lives without remorse. It was more than loss. It was a betrayal. In the years after, many survivors didn't ask for much. They didn't seek revenge, just acknowledgement. But as the years passed, they were forced to watch those responsible continue their lives. The injustice wasn't just physical loss. It was the betrayal of knowing their suffering had never truly mattered. This is the human toll of injustice, the unseen wounds that run deeper than any scar. The war may have ended, but the true fight was for truth, for justice, and for a world that would acknowledge the pain of so many. When those responsible walked free, it wasn't just the victims who lost. It was the very essence of justice itself. In 2021, the world found itself on edge, with the US, Russia, and China at the forefront of a growing arms race that echoed the tensions of the Cold War. Inside Washington, D.C., officials were gathered to discuss the escalating military competition between the three global superpowers. What had once been a contest of trade agreements and economic dominance had evolved into something much more dangerous: a battle for military supremacy. The quiet hum of Pentagon meetings was heavy with the realization that military strategies were no longer focused on diplomacy or containment. With Russia's actions in Ukraine and China's increasing military presence in the South China Sea, the stakes had shifted. In the U.S., defense officials began to speak candidly about the need to prepare for an all-out conflict. "We can't afford to be caught unprepared," they said, recognizing the mounting pressure from both sides. The military budgets in the U.S. and China had been climbing steadily. By 2021, China's military expenditure had surpassed the U.S. in certain areas, particularly in terms of technological advancements like hypersonic missiles and advanced nuclear systems. This shift in military priorities wasn't just a number on a report. It was felt in the air, in the rumble of jet engines overhead, and in the growing fear among the world's citizens. These weren't just military drills anymore. They were reminders of a global conflict that could break out at any moment. While China's ambitions in the South China Sea were undeniable, the U.S. Navy made sure to assert its presence, conducting freedom of navigation operations to challenge China's territorial claims. The stakes were rising with every military maneuver, with the tension between Washington and Beijing becoming palpable. Taiwan, a democratic stronghold in the region, found itself at the center of this growing storm, with both nations positioning their forces in a delicate, high-stakes standoff. It was a standoff that felt like the world was teetering on the edge of something much larger. In Eastern Europe, the situation was no different. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 marked a turning point, not just for Ukraine, but for the entire world. NATO's response was swift, with the U.S. leading the charge to provide billions of dollars in military and humanitarian aid to the Ukrainian government. The sound of bombs falling over Ukrainian cities was no longer just a conflict on the periphery. It was a crisis that threatened to escalate into something far more catastrophic. Amid this escalating global instability, one chilling truth became undeniable. The arms race wasn't just a matter of missiles and bombs. It was a psychological battle. Nuclear weapons, once confined to the history books, were now part of daily discourse once again. Russia, China, and the US were all modernizing their nuclear arsenals, and the implications of this renewed focus on nuclear power were becoming ever more apparent. The silence surrounding the threat of nuclear war was deafening, as nations focused on building their military deterrents, aware that the next crisis could push them past the point of no return. The tension was growing. Each new development felt like a warning shot, A reminder that these rising military tensions were no longer theoretical. What was happening now was real. The sound of jet engines above military bases and the increasing presence of nuclear rhetoric were only the beginning of a global military escalation. The question wasn't just if these superpowers would collide. It was when. The gears were already in motion, and the world watched in silence, wondering how long it would take before the war of words turned into a war of bombs. In the midst of rising global tensions, the human cost is often overlooked. It's easy to focus on trade wars, military buildups, and political posturing, but for the people living in conflict zones, it's not a game. It's survival. In Ukraine, 2022, as Russian forces advanced toward Kyiv, the city was filled with smoke and fear. A mother held her child close, the sound of bombs rattling the apartment windows. The smell of burning fuel seeped through cracks in the walls. For Elena, the future no longer existed in the form of plans. It was about surviving each day. The fight wasn't just political for Ukraine. It was personal. Meanwhile, in Beijing, senior Chinese officials sat in tense silence, staring at screens where the Taiwan Strait loomed large. The quiet hum of air conditioning barely masked the pressure in the room. These decisions weren't about military superiority. They were about history. The fate of Taiwan rested in their hands, and no one dared to speak too loudly, knowing that every word weighed heavily on the future. In Washington, a military strategist pored over intelligence reports. The map before him marked U.S. naval deployments in the South China Sea, a region brimming with tension. Outside his office, the streets were busy, but inside, time felt still. Each new report felt like a countdown. Every decision a potential spark for something larger. The threat of war wasn't distant. It was real. The stench of smoke hung in the air in Kyiv, mixing with the heat of the day. Olena's footsteps echoed against the cracked pavement as she rushed through the streets. The sound of gunfire rang out nearby, and her heart raced, matching the rhythm of the explosions in the distance. The weight of fear pressed on her chest, her survival instincts taking over. The fear was palpable, suffocating, as every step felt like it could be her last. In Beijing, the silence in the room was suffocating. The faint buzz of the phone felt like a ticking clock, and the sharp scent of stale coffee lingered in the air. There was no comfort in that room. Every decision shifted the course of history. The pressure weighed on their shoulders, and they knew it. No one dared break the quiet. Every move could alter the fate of nations. In Washington, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the strategist's tired face. The map in front of him seemed like a reminder that the world was on the edge. The hum of the lights was almost drowned out by the weight of his thoughts, the consequences of each new report pulling him deeper into the fear of what was to come. Outside, life continued, but in the room, time felt frozen, each moment more critical than the last. For those living through these crises, the larger geopolitical games were not just about borders and policies. They were about survival. In Ukraine, the bombs didn't just destroy buildings, they shattered lives. In Taiwan, families could only wait, hoping their country wouldn't become a battleground. And in the boardrooms of Beijing and Washington, leaders bore the weight of the world on their shoulders, knowing that a single wrong move could ignite a global firestorm. The cost of these decisions isn't just felt in boardrooms or military outposts. It's felt in the homes of those who never asked for war. The stakes have never been higher. The geopolitical tensions we discussed aren't just theoretical. They're playing out in real time, and the signs of World War III are emerging before our eyes. Just last week, tensions between the US and China reached a boiling point after China's military exercises near Taiwan, following a controversial visit from a US official. This move prompted a sharp response from Beijing, accusing the US of interfering in China's sovereignty. Today, Taiwan remains the flashpoint, a region that could trigger a global conflict at any moment. Just last month, China's foreign minister publicly warned the US that any further support for Taiwan could result in irreversible consequences, signaling the rising risk of military confrontation. The situation is tense, and every action taken by these superpowers could ignite something much larger. The Middle East is no different. Just weeks ago, Iran's nuclear capabilities made headlines again after the U.S. accused Tehran of advancing its nuclear program despite ongoing diplomatic talks. The tensions between the U.S. and Iran have remained high since the U.S. withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, and the situation is only becoming more volatile. Iran's nuclear activities have drawn sharp criticism from the West, and military conflicts involving Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq continue to stir the pot, heightening the possibility of a broader regional war. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, the Russo-Ukrainian war continues to escalate. The front lines in Donbass have seen some of the most intense fighting yet, with Russia increasing its military support for separatist forces and pushing deeper into Ukrainian territory. NATO's response has been swift, with the US and European allies sending advanced weaponry to Ukraine to bolster defenses. The situation is growing dire, with Russia showing no signs of backing down. As this war drags on, it threatens to engulf even more nations, dragging Europe into the flames of conflict. The truth is, these flashpoints aren't isolated. They're all connected, each one a piece of a larger puzzle that's pointing toward the unthinkable. The trade war between the US and China, the nuclear threat from Iran, and the conflict in Ukraine are all signs of a broader, more dangerous geopolitical shift. The actions of global powers are setting the stage for a confrontation that could draw the entire world into the kind of conflict we've been dreading for decades. The global landscape is shifting, and the question remains, are we already in the midst of World War III? Which of these signs do you think is the most dangerous? Is it the rising tensions between the US and China, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, or the looming nuclear threat? We want to hear from you. Do you agree that World War III has already begun, or do you think we're still far from it? Click on the poll above to cast your vote. Is World War III already happening? Then head to the comments below and share your thoughts. What signs do you see that the world is heading toward a global conflict? Do you think the world can avoid war, or is it inevitable? Join the discussion and let us know what you think. Your perspective matters. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like and share it with others. Together, we can keep the conversation going and make sure this issue gets the attention it deserves. Stay informed, stay engaged. Hit that subscribe button to keep up with more discussions on global tensions and how they're shaping our world. The world is changing rapidly, and we want to hear from you. What's the scariest thing happening in global politics right now? Is it the rising threat of nuclear conflict? The tension in Taiwan? Or maybe the escalating cyber warfare between superpowers? Share your thoughts with us as we break down how these events could lead to World War III. Your voice matters, and we want to hear your perspective on what's unfolding across the globe. As we explore these dangerous signs, don't hesitate to jump into the comments with your opinions. What's your take on the role of cyber warfare in modern conflicts? Can digital attacks trigger a real-world war, or are they just a distraction? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and let's start a conversation. This isn't just about the facts, it's about understanding the real impact of these global tensions on you. So as you watch, think about the implications, ask yourself, and leave your thoughts. We'll be reading through your comments and responding, because this conversation doesn't stop here.